Yo, welcome back everybody to a brand new video here on the second channel. And today I have my meta predictions for the Gdansk and Brisbane regionals. We got two regionals this weekend. We just had the little regionals last week, but now we have two more regionals before we get to Las Vegas. So in this video, I'm going to be predicting what I think is going to go down in these tournaments, what decks are going to perform well, any wild card picks that I have, and just overall kind of give my opinions on where I think the meta is right now and like what decks have the best chance of performing well after we saw the results at the Lille Regionals. And of course, if y'all are new here to the second channel, make sure to subscribe down below. Let me know what you think is going to win Gdansk and or Brisbane Regionals. We got two of them this weekend, so you got double the chances. Who knows what might happen? So we'll start off with Gardevoir. So Gardy didn't do as well at Lille Regionals as it's usually been doing, and that's mainly because, I don't know, just people weren't playing it. Dragapult Dusknoir had a really good shot of winning the tournament, and it did win the tournament. Dragapult Dusknoir had a very good weekend, but I don't think that's going to repeat. I think that we are going to see Gardevoir completely rebound and become the best deck for the tournament. I mean, Gardy is Gardy. Now, the question is going to be, though, is Gardevoir with, like, Drifloon good, or is it better to just play Jelly Gardy this weekend? And it's going to be the main question. Those are, like, the two variants of Gardevoir that are the most common. I think Jelly Gardy will probably be the better version of the deck, just because it is stronger into Dragapult, and just because, like, Dragapult is doing so well. I'm starting to think that the format is starting to kind of shift more in favor of some of these more, like, faster decks, like Gholdengo, Ledge, even Raging Bolt. I definitely don't hate the idea of, like, Jellicent being the better Gardevoir deck for this weekend, just because you're able to slow down these decks more. You have a way better Dragapult Dusknoir matchup than the normal Gardy list. Now, I've seen people talk about playing Psyduck and Gardy. I don't know, like, you don't really need to play a Pokemon in your deck just to beat a matchup that you're supposed to be favored against, but if you want to put a Psyduck in your Gardy deck, it would do decently well into Charizard. Yeah, Gardevoir still has to deal with Charizard, but I still think that the Jellicent build is, like, the most well-rounded variant of the deck. It's just that the Gardy Drifloon variant does have a better matchup into the bigger decks like the Gholdengo, Ledge, a lot better into Kanga Absol. So yeah, Gardy's probably primed to win this weekend. I think if I'm going to put money on any deck winning Brisbane and Gdansk, I think it's Gardevoir. I mean, honestly, Gardevoir could win both regionals. It's possible. I think it is very possible we could see Gardevoir win both Gdansk and Brisbane regionals. Now, Polnor did have a very good weekend in Lille, but I don't think that result is going to carry over into Gdansk and Brisbane because people are just now going to go back to playing Gardy. All the big players were on Dragapult, which I think is why Dragapult did quote-unquote dominate, where Gardy flopped, because not enough people were just playing Gardevoir. Gardevoir just wasn't being as represented by the top players. Dragapult Dusknoir was, but now it's going to switch. We're going to see a lot of the top players on Gardy, which means Dragapult Dusknoir is not going to have the best weekend. Now, this deck is still very good. I don't think the deck is bad by any means, just because it won a regional, and now the deck that counters it is going to start seeing more play now. Doesn't mean the deck is bad. I mean, Dragapult still beats basically everything else in the format except for Gardevoir. So I still think Dragapult Dusknoir will still have good representation. Decent chance one or two will be in top 8 or ASIM at both Gdansk and in Brisbane. I just don't think it's going to win the tournament this time. It's pretty much just unlikely, unless somebody figures out a good Dragapult Dusknoir list that somehow can beat Gardy. Now, Charizard is in a weird spot right now. So Zard will be a lot better for this weekend if Gardevoir starts to pick up and play, because, well, Dragapult was the one that kind of gate-kept Charizard. Charizard's a really good deck. Doesn't have the best Dragapult matchup. Even with the Psyduck, the matchup is still tricky, but now that Gardevoir might start being more popular for these two tournaments, Zard might have a better weekend, especially if Dragapult drops off a little bit. So I think Charizard is still in a decent spot. Still one of the best decks you can play right now. We could see one in top 8. We did see one make top 8 in Lille despite the Dragapult dominance, but I mean, even if the deck made it all the way, it's like you're struggling into the pull matchup. You're probably not beating it. But yeah, Charizard still looks pretty good for this weekend, and I wouldn't be surprised if we still saw Charizard have a good showing. Now, Grimmsnarl's a deck that I think is actually very underrated right now. I think that this deck is getting underplayed. Now, part of that could just be because it's not as consistent as something like Charizard or Dragapult or Gardevoir, or the deck is just not, people just don't think it's very good. I think Grimmsnarl is actually a really good deck right now, especially for this weekend specifically. Dragapult Dusknoir just won, which is a good match for this deck. On top of that, we did see Charizard do well. Charizard will still be popular. Grimmsnarl has a great matchup in Charizard, in my opinion. I think Grimm is honestly in a pretty good spot right now in the format. It does struggle a little bit into turbo decks like Gholdengo and Ledge are not very good matchups at all. That's the only thing holding Grimmsnarl back, is you do have a bad matchup against those two decks. Other than that, though, the deck's pretty good into mostly everything else in the format. I actually don't hate Grimmsnarl right now. It's kind of just one of those decks where, like, it's carried by how good the player is and how consistent the deck actually gets to function. Because at the end of the day, the deck is a bit of a pile. It's a little bricky. It's not the most consistent deck ever, but I do think Grimmsnarl is a sneakily good deck for Brisbane and Gdansk. It's definitely like if I was going to one of these two regionals, I would consider sleeving up Grim myself. But I want to talk about Tera, another deck that I think is very underrated right now. It's actually been performing pretty well. We saw two make ASIM at the Lille Regionals. Two different builds. We saw the more common build here, with just like the grass types plus the Mega Mawile giving you a little bit of firepower. Then we saw Carter with his cheesy box deck with like Absol, Kangaskhan, stuff like that. I think that Tera is in a very solid position right now. It's one of those like Grimmsnarl. It's a very underrated deck that I think more people should be playing. Now, obviously, the deck can be a little iffy into the likes of Charizard or Dragapult. Actually, Charizard's not a great matchup either, even with the grass Pokemon. Like, you're not really, like, beating anything, like, super consistently. I would say your best matchup is either like, Gholdengo or, like, I don't even know if Gholdengo's a good matchup anymore because of Zoroark. But the deck doesn't really, like, flat out just beat anything. But it does 50-50 most things, and I think that's pretty good. Like, I think Tera is a super underrated deck right now. More people should be trying it out. Definitely one that I think more people will play and can definitely top 8 either Brisbane or Gdansk. I think we'll probably see a Tera or two in one of those two top 8s because I think enough good players are respecting the deck and playing it and making their own innovations. Like we've been seeing the Mega Absol in the deck and stuff, the Mega Mawile start creeping into the list. So like people are innovating with Tera I think it's a good thing. And this deck, if it keeps innovating, can do well. Because I think like the Absol dark stuff gives you a pretty solid guarding matchup. The Mawile helps a lot into like Dragapult and stuff. Yeah, I mean, Tera is a really good deck. Wouldn't be surprised if another one made top 8. Then we got to talk about Kanga Absol. Now, this deck definitely is starting to fall off. It did have a very good weekend in Milwaukee. At Lille Regionals, it underperformed pretty badly. And then I think going forward, I think the deck will continue to decline in play. The most recent build that did well was this kind of control build with Eerie, Zoroark, Devo. Just trying to be as disruptive as you can with the opponent's hand. The problem is, I think the deck is just starting to get countered now. I mean, this build doesn't even play Cornerstone Ogre Pawn in it, so it's like, it's not even using anything to like wall the opponent off. Like, I think that this deck is starting to phase out. It's not a bad deck, though, by any means. I think the deck is actually still pretty good, but it's definitely not as good as it was from Milwaukee, and I think people are just starting to figure it out now. It's starting to get countered more, and I just don't think the deck is going to do as well this weekend. I think it'll still, like, have an okay result. Like, I mean, one did get top 32 in Lille, but I think it's time for this deck maybe to get, like, phased out a little bit. But it's still pretty good. Like, I don't think the deck is bad by any means. I think it's still a pretty solid deck. I'll have to see how it performs in these two regionals. Because, like, honestly, I don't even know if this deck will make top 8 in either of the regionals. All right, Gholdengo. I think Dengo's actually pretty well positioned right now. I think it's one of the better decks you can play for this weekend. Another deck that, if I was going to one of these two regionals, I would very much consider sleeving up Gholdengo. I like Gholdengo in this format because the deck is kind of like, it's all over the place. Like, you have a pretty atrocious Charizard matchup, in my opinion. Like, even with the rocks, I don't know. The Zard matchup I've never been a fan of. Like, they have Dusknoir, plus they have Chiyu. Like, the matchup is pretty hard to beat, in my opinion. The Zoroark Lunatone helps a little bit, but not a whole lot. Dengo definitely is in a precarious spot where I think the deck is still very strong, and actually beating Guardy is pretty good. And the problem is, if Guardy Jelly starts being more common again, I don't think Gholdengo Zoroark is very good, because it doesn't have a good matchup into Gardevoir Jellicent, because you don't have Levincia, you don't really have as many outs to Jellicent, or Frillish for that matter. Like, they don't even have the Jelly you. They could literally just sit there and Frillish you for, like, endless amount of turns, and you can't beat that. So Dengo isn't very good into Guardy Jelly. The Dengo rocks anyways. If you're playing Dengo Togekiss or Dengo Scizor, you're pretty good into Guardy Jelly. But Turbo Gardevoir, I actually think is a pretty good matchup. If you're playing it like Drifloon Guardy with no Jelly, I think the deck's actually pretty solid. You have a good Dragapult matchup, you have a good Grim matchup, you have a good Kangaskhan Absol matchup, especially if you're playing Mawile or Lucario. I like Gholdengo. I think it's a very solid deck. The only thing that scares me is you're not as good into Tera and you're not as good into Charizard. Also, Raging Bolt still is kind of up in the air. So, like, you're still and Sarah Ledge is not spectacular either. So, like, you do kind of have a weird matchup spread, but you are beating the top decks. If you can make it past, like, round 5 or 6 with this deck, you can probably start hitting all the big names on the big decks, and then you're going to start having a better time. Like, even Zoroark, we saw Piper's Zoroark build with no Toadscruel. that's another matchup that I think is actually fairly favored. As long as you're playing around the Darmanitan, it's really not that hard to play around Darmanitan, in my opinion. So I like Gholdengo. It's pretty good for this weekend. We'll have to see, though. Zoroark is another deck that I think is also pretty underrated. I think the deck kind of just stays neutral. It was a good play for Lil. Piper did top 4 the regional. Honestly, she probably could have won the tournament if she made it all the way. I definitely think she had a chance of winning. Lil, I think going into Brisbane and Gdansk, I think Zoroark stays relatively the same. I think it's still a very strong pick. With the fact that we're going to see more Gardevoir again, this just makes the deck even stronger. Especially if Guardy Jelly is the more common build for this weekend, there's a very good chance Zoroark ends up still being one good deck for this weekend. Now, Piper's build, I think, is perfect. Darmanitan does a lot to help cover some of your more trickier matchups. Gives you more lines. In general, the Okie Dokie is good into the Cornerstone stuff and has another attacker. Like, I think Zoroark is still, like, just a fantastic play for this weekend. Maybe, you know, if I was going, I would even consider sleeving up Zoroark. I think Zoroark is just that good of a deck. It's just draws so many cards, has a good matchup in a Gardevoir, especially if Guardy Jelly starts to come back in the format. I think Zoroark is a very well-positioned deck for this weekend. Still stays relatively the same. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if somebody top-8'd with Zoroark, or at least a couple in top 8 like we saw last week. Sarah Ledge goes fast, hits hard. Sarah Ledge, still not a bad deck. I don't really know how it changes or anything. I don't think it really does change. I mean, it's still just a very strong, consistently powerful deck for this format. I think the one thing to kind of note about Sarah Ledge, though, is, like, is it better than Gholdengo? Gholdengo does, in my opinion, have a slightly better Dragapult matchup than Sarah Ledge does, but Sarah Ledge does have a better matchup into Guardy Jelly than Gholdengo. Not sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if Sarah Ledge still did decent. Like, all these decks I just listed are all decks I can definitely see make top 8. Raging Bolt is where things start to get a little iffy. I don't know if Raging Bolt will make top 8. Like, look, Raging Bolt is not a bad deck. I just think that the deck is starting to get phased out a little bit. I think its main hype was probably that it was pretty good into Kanga Absol. Like, if you were to play this deck to Milwaukee, you probably could have done decent. But I think, like, post that, now that Kanga Absol is starting to fall off a little bit, we're starting to see Dragapult, you know, become a bigger presence in the meta. And Gardevoir becoming, you know, coming back for this weekend. I just think that this deck, it just doesn't feel very good. Like, I don't know. Will Raging Bull make top 8? I think Terra Box is just a better deck, but we'll have to see. Now, I want to talk about Control a little bit. Control has actually been, I wouldn't really say it's been flying under the radar, but it definitely seems like Control isn't really being talked about as much, and has actually been putting up good results. It's been top 32, top 16, I'm pretty sure. The deck is very legit. I think Control does still have room to grow, and I think, you know, this weekend, more Control players are going to continue to have good results and success with Pidgeot Control. There's a couple of variants I've been seeing people playing, like Absols and stuff, and there's this build here, and I think Caterpie played with all the different techs in here to help in different matchups and stuff. But, I mean, Control seems like a pretty good deck to play right now. Like, I think that it's underrated. Nobody's really talking about it or really thinking about it, which I think is a good thing. If you're playing Control, you're probably farming a lot of people that don't know what they're doing against the deck. So if I was playing Control this weekend, I think it's a decent play. I think Control is pretty good. It's one of those decks where I just think that the possibility of it top 80 in a regional is pretty high right now. Especially, again, if Guardy's coming back into the fray, it's a good thing for this deck. This deck does, in my opinion, I mean, with the right lines, I think it probably beats Gardevoir, I'm assuming. I mean, with my Milotic Sudowoodo, that should be more than enough, especially if Guardy's playing Turo. I don't think Guardy's going to play Turo this weekend. I think they're all going to cut the Turos, but, you know, it does help, obviously. And then we have Crustle. Crustle. I don't think this deck will never be a good play for a regional. It's just always one of those decks where if you want to play something that, you know, takes free wins, play it, but you lose to Gardevoir. You want to play a deck that takes free wins, play Crustle, but yeah, loses to Guardy. It still, like, isn't a bad deck. And like I said, you are beating everything. It's just once you start hitting all the Guardy players, like, you're never making it to the top tables with Crustle. But, yeah, I just wanted to highlight Crustle real quick. Then I want to talk about Flareon, the other Tera box deck that nobody really talks about anymore. I think it's just mainly because people figured out that why not just play the Flareon Leafeon in Tera box itself and just not play Flareon. But Flareon still is good. I mean, it's still a deck that I think is fairly strong. You've been seeing people pioneering and playing the deck still. Actually had decent results in low regionals. I think like a couple outside top 32, one made top 16 or top 32 or something like ASIM even, I think. So I think Flareon's still not a bad deck at all. People are just not playing Sylveon anymore. But you don't really need the Sylveon. Just kind of leaning more into like a Terra box approach is perfectly fine. And I think Flareon is still fine. Joltic box is fine too. Like, this is another deck that probably was a little bit better for Milwaukee, or not. I don't even know if it was great for Lille, but I just think now if we're going to start seeing Guardy come back into the format, this deck gets a bit worse. But Joltic Box, still just one of those strong, powerful decks that can still make day 2 and can still run people over because it's just a fast deck that sometimes people just can't beat. I will say it does have a good matchup into Zoroark. I think your Charizard matchup's also like fairly decent too. Despite having like Dusknoir issues, this deck's still pretty good into Zard. And then Django, the other Joltic deck, Gholdengo Joltic has fallen off quite a bit since some of its hype before, but the deck's still good. Honestly, if I was playing Django or Joltic in general, I would just probably stick to Gholdengo Joltic because Joltic Gholdengo I think is still just the better way to play the deck, but the deck's still like pretty solid. Gholdengo still gives the deck a lot of room for one-hit KOs. This deck does have a better Guardy matchup than Joltic Box, so that's one thing I'm going to be saying. Like, going into a tournament where I think Gardevoir is going to be very well represented this weekend in both Gdansk and Brisbane, Gholdengo Joltic seems like the better version of Joltic to play because it does have a better matchup into Gardevoir, for sure. I want to talk about Mega Lucario. We're getting to more of the fun stuff now. But yeah, Mega Lucario, I think, is still a cool deck. We saw it have like some okay results, but obviously with Guardy coming back into the format as like a big deck again, not where it was in Little. I mean, Guardy was still a big deck in Little. I'm not saying it was bad. It's just it wasn't as well represented as it could have been. But now it's going to be. So like, Lucario is probably not going to have a good result. I mean, this deck will eventually be good. Like, trust me, when Guardy leaves the format, I think we'll start seeing Mega Lucario put up better results. I think if I'm going to play a fighting deck, that I rather just would play Garchomp. Garchomp's pretty cool, man. This deck's pretty strong. It doesn't really do anything like special or crazy. I actually don't even think it really beats a lot of decks right now, but it's still like a pretty solid deck. And I think you can still win games with off the back. Garchomp being hard to kill, having it Psyduck I think is good. You probably have to play this deck with like a couple switches to make it work consistently. But yeah, Garchomp's pretty cool. I like this deck a lot, and I'm a big fan of Garchomp. I always want to see Garchomp succeed. I think the deck's really fun, and I like it a lot. All right, so I want to make a wild card pick here. Blood Moon Ursa Luna, the Tim Tinklin deck. This deck is wild. You know what? Wild card pick, yo. What if this deck made top 32 in Brisbane or Gdansk? That would be pretty cool. Probably has a higher chance of doing Brisbane because, Tim Tinklin's most likely going to be looking into playing the deck for this weekend. But you know what? This deck making top 32 would be pretty cool to see. I'm just going to highlight that as one of my wild card picks. My other wild card pick is going to go to Alakazam, which I still want to highlight as like a really cool deck. I saw this build here in Lille playing the Ducks, the Psyducks, and the Golduck just beat down on Dragapult. Dragapult is still not the best matchup, even with the Ducks, but it does help a little bit. And it makes it a little bit more playable, obviously. Guardy is still like a bad matchup, but I want to see Alakazam do well. I don't think anyone's cashed with Alakazam yet. I don't think it's gone to top 32 yet. I could be wrong, but I don't think it's top 32. I want to see somebody cash this weekend with Alakazam. And then Conkeldurr, probably just worse than Blood Moon Ursa Luna, but still like a fine, powerful one prize or beat stick deck, for sure. But yeah, my wild card picks, I think it'd be really cool to see Blood Moon Ursa Luna cash a regional, make top 32. I think that'd be pretty cool if that happened. All right, now let's get into my meta predictions here for what I think is going to see play this weekend. So starting off, all the decks in S tier, by the way, I think are like literally like the S tier picks for this weekend. These are like the best decks to play to the tournament. But start with Gardevoir. Gardevoir will probably be around like 13% of the format. Guardy will pick up and play this weekend after Dragapult. Speaking of which, we'll put Dragapult probably around 10%. Dragapult will still be played pretty heavily, but I just don't think it'll be as well represented. Like I said, not all the good players are going to be on it this time, and Gardevoir will be the deck that everyone will be playing instead. That's why I bumped Gardevoir up a bit higher. I think Charizard probably around like 9%. Seems correct. This is probably for Gdansk because Brisbane's a bit smaller, but I can see like Charizard being around like 9%. I'm not going to count Guardy Jelly because it's like a different variant, but it is still an S tier. Mega Kanga Absol will be like a 6%er or like even a 5% deck. I think the deck's just falling off quite hard, and I just don't see the deck picking back up at the moment. Gholdengo, probably 8 to 9%. We've actually been seeing a lot of Gholdengo. It's not really been like putting up the results that it could be, but Gholdengo has been consistently been one of the most played decks at the past two regionals. So, I mean, that'll probably continue into this weekend in both Brisbane and Gdansk. So I wouldn't be surprised if like in Gdansk and Brisbane, Gholdengo's in both regionals like around that 9% range still. For sure. Especially because it doesn't seem like a bad play for this weekend either. Grimmsnarl will probably be in like a 5%. Raging Bolt, 4%. Tera Box, probably 5%. I think the deck's getting enough respect and hype right now that maybe it'll carry over into a better result. Joltic Box, like 3%. And then maybe like Sarah Ledge, I'd give to like Sarah Ledge probably gets like an 8%, 7 to 8%. Gholdengo probably will be a little bit more played than Sarah Ledge. Even though Sarah Ledge is technically, I don't know if it's a stronger deck. I think Gholdengo is probably the stronger deck, but Sarah Ledge I can see being in that like 8 to 9% also. Control, 2%. Zoroark probably. So this one's weird. Zoroark is never the most played deck, and it's never going to be on the graphic. However, Piper's results could influence enough people to play it, especially as the talk of the town is that Gardevoir is going to once again be the most played deck in the room, and all the big players are going to be on it, which gives people a reason to actually want to bring Zoroark to this regional. Could Zoroark break above 5%? Let's give it a 5%, just because there's enough hype, I think, from Piper's result, and with Gardevoir doing well, there's a good chance we could see enough people start to finally pick up Zoroark and give it the respect. I'll probably give Grimmsnarl like a 7%, by the way. Grimm's a little bit too low. Because actually, thinking back, Grimmsnarl actually has been consistently been on the day one graphic. So I probably should put Grimm a bit higher than 6%. That seems a little bit too low. And then I guess 20% goes to like the other category, because there is a lot of other decks you can play right now in the format. Like Crustle. If I was putting Crustle on here, it'd probably be like a 2% deck, like stuff like that. So other decks would fill this out. But this is my meta prediction. Like, Guardy will probably go back to being the most played deck. It might have been the most played deck, actually, in Lil. I could be wrong about that. Dragapult will decline and play a bit. I think Pult and Guardy have a good chance of being the 10%ers. Maybe Charizard is a 10% deck, actually, now that I think about it. Charizard actually will probably be a 10% deck. Enough people do like their Charizard. And with Guardy, being potentially good again, people have more reason to just once again sleeve up Charizard, especially if Pult underperforms this weekend. This is better for Charizard. Gholdengo, Sarah Ledge in that 9-8%. Grim Absol, Tera box, definitely in that like more percent. I mean, honestly, Tera box genuinely could be a 6%er. I'm between Tera box and Kanga Absol as a 6% deck. Tera box is a better deck than Kanga Absol in my opinion at the moment, but I can see Absol being 6%. This is kind of interesting for sure. But yeah, there you go. Those are my meta predictions for the Gdansk and the Brisbane regionals. Wildcard picks. I would love to see Alexander Blood Moon make cash. Guardy will probably win one of the two regionals, if not both of them. I think Guardy Jelly will be the more represented Gardevoir deck. Charizard, Gholdengo, Grimmsnarl, Tera box might have a good weekend. There's some underrated decks for this tournament. I think Zoroark will once again also perform really well. Somebody's going to play Zoroark and do well with it again. I think all those things will very much happen this weekend. Hope you enjoyed the video on this deck, or on this meta prediction. Sorry, I don't know what I'm trying to say there. My meta predictions. Let me know your meta predictions for Brisbane and Gdansk are in the comment section below. I'll catch you on another video very soon. Bye-bye.